Thank you. Senator Kelly, another emotional issue. Do you think Governor Sununu is doing enough to protect students when it comes to state gun laws and initiatives directed at that issue?
Let me just say, just to clarify here, today I have 4 children. And my husband and I, we also have 7 grandchildren. And when my children went to school, I never worried about them as to whether they'd be affected with gun violence. But I worry every single day about my 7 grandchildren. I will not wait as governor to wait for a tragedy in the state. We do need to do more about common sense gun safety. I disagree with my opponent. As governor, we need to put forth, and I will, universal background checks as well, and red flag laws. Keep guns out of the hands of children and domestic abusers. And the first bill that my opponent signed into law was to allow anyone to carry a concealed weapon without a permit, and I would repeal that. We need to make sure and to keep our children safe in school. They look to us, they trust us, and they expect us to make them safe. And as governor, I will work to be able to do that.
Okay, Governor, when you commissioned a task force earlier this year to study school safety, they didn't look at gun laws or the availability of firearms because it was considered to be sort of a political issue, if I read the report correctly. Why did they not cover that important, what some may say was a very important area?
So the Safe School Task Force that we commissioned was put together with students, with parents, with teachers, with law enforcement, all the stakeholders. And what they put together in terms of the report has now been held up as a national model. Over 50 solid recommendations in terms of how to really make sure we're dealing with the crux of the issue. We invested over $30 million into safe school infrastructure. Over 400 schools across the state got those grants. Previously, no administration had ever invested a dollar there. At the end of the day, we have to get to the core of the issue. That's about the kids. That's about the undiagnosed mental health and illnesses that some of these children have, the fact that we're not providing those wraparound services to them in the schools, communication if a crisis were to happen. We can talk about gun control, but at the end of the day, that doesn't deal with the crux of the problem. We need to make sure we're providing those services in a very safe and responsible manner. We've made bigger investments than any administration ever before in safe schools, and that task force report, again, is a model for the rest of the country.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, you're calling for gun-free zones around schools. Please explain how that would stop a mass shooting, since several schools, including Parkland High in Florida, had that policy in place.
We need to do everything we can to make sure that our schools are safe. And the bill that I'm referring to when you ask that question is a bill that allows the local communities to put into policy their own policies to keep gun safety zones in their schools. My opponent vetoed that bill. It does not support that bill, but we need to be able to move forward and do that. Let me also say that we are just coming off from a week of some terrible events having to do with gun violence, bigotry, and hatred as well. And it was just really a few weeks ago, and I just want to say that guns have to be a part of a discussion. That discussion was not a part of the task force. It is the same as the Trump administration's task force with Betsy DeVos. They didn't talk about guns as well. I will also say it was just a few days ago, just after the event, that my opponent visited a manufacturer of guns in our state and made an announcement that gun sales are booming here in New Hampshire.
That's time.
Governor, as your opponent just brought up, New Hampshire does have a long tradition of local control, so why not let towns or school districts decide if they want to have gun-free zones?
Again, it's a matter of the Constitution, right? We are one of the safest states in the country when it comes to firearm safety. And it's a responsibility I think that everyone in the state takes very seriously. We have a wonderful, not just tradition, but we've actually moved forward in terms of making sure that we're dealing with the crux of these issues. You can talk about guns and that political argument all day long, but at the end of the day, are we really providing the services to the individual, right? To the person that would do harm? A sign isn't going to, if someone has the will to go and shoot up a school or a synagogue, I mean, a sign isn't going to stop that. We need to make sure we're providing those services, making sure kids with a problem don't become a kid in crisis. And that's what that Safe School Task Force report was all about. And that's why it's being heralded across the country nationally. Right? We've really created a model of getting to the crux of these issues, investing dollars in mental health, which we have done, investing dollars in voluntary services with families, same programs that my opponent slashed when she was in the Senate, we've reinstated, and we're being proactive and preventative in our communities.
And Governor, just to follow really quickly, your interpretation of state law on this matter, do you feel it's legal for an adult who is not a student to walk into a school with a concealed weapon?
The Constitution protects that right.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next question.